The blood pooling beneath her husband's body had barely begun to soak into the dusty floorboards when Clara Brennan heard the first shout from downstairs. And she knew with ice-cold certainty that she would be next if she did not run. She scrambled backward from Thomas's corpse, her wedding ring catching the lamplight as her trembling hands pushed against the floor. And then she was on her feet, grabbing nothing but the shawl draped over the bedpost before launching herself toward the window. The Carson gang had come for the money Thomas supposedly owed them, but Clara knew her husband had been an honest merchant who never touched cards or dice. They had murdered an innocent man, and witnesses were loose ends that men like Jacob Carson did not leave untied. She hit the alley behind the boarding house at a dead run, her boots pounding against packed earth as gunshots echoed from the room she had just fled. Gold Hill, Nevada had been their home for 8 months, a bustling mining town where Thomas had opened his dry goods store with such hope in his eyes. Now it was a nightmare of shadows and shouting voices, and Clara ran blindly into the darkness beyond the last buildings, heading toward the scrubland that stretched endlessly under a pitiless moon. She did not know where she was going. She knew only that stopping meant dying. The November night bit through her thin cotton dress, but terror kept her warm as she stumbled over sagebrush and scattered rocks. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit faded, but she could not make herself slow down. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind through the desert vegetation sent fresh jolts of panic through her chest. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, until she tripped over a jutting stone and went sprawling onto the cold ground. For a moment she simply lay there, gasping and sobbing, her mind replaying the image of Thomas's shocked expression as the bullet struck him. When she finally pushed herself upright, she realized she was hopelessly lost. The lights of Gold Hill had vanished behind a rise, and in every direction stretched nothing but darkness and the skeletal shapes of Joshua trees. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and started walking, choosing a direction at random because staying still felt like surrender. Her teeth chattered violently. The temperature was dropping fast, as it always did in the high desert once the sun went down. She had no food, no water, no weapon. She was 22 years old and had been married for less than a year. And now she was a widow fleeing into the wilderness with killers potentially on her trail. She walked for hours, her fear gradually giving way to a numb exhaustion. When false dawn began to pale the eastern sky, she found herself in a shallow ravine where a few scraggly cottonwoods suggested the presence of water. Sure enough, a thin trickle ran between the rocks, and she fell to her knees beside it, cupping the precious liquid in her shaking hands. It tasted of minerals and desert dust, but it was the finest thing she had ever consumed. She drank until her stomach cramped, then collapsed against the trunk of the nearest tree and let unconsciousness claim her. The sun was already climbing toward noon when she woke to the sound of hoofbeats. Clara jerked upright with a strangled gasp, her heart slamming against her ribs as she pressed herself against the tree trunk. The horse was approaching slowly, picking its way down into the ravine, and atop it sat a figure that resolved itself into a man as he drew closer. Not one of Carson's gang, she realized with a flood of relief so intense it left her dizzy. This rider wore the dusty trail clothes of a working cowboy, and he sat his paint horse with the easy grace of someone who had been born in the saddle. He was still 50 yards away when he raised one hand in a gesture that might have been meant as a greeting or a signal for her not to bolt. Clara found herself frozen in place, unable to make her exhausted body move. The cowboy dismounted while still a good distance from her, looping his reins around a low branch, and then he simply stood there, not approaching any closer. She could see him more clearly now. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled over his collar and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. His hat was pushed back on his head, and his eyes were a surprising shade of blue in his sun-bronzed face. "Miss," he said quietly, his voice pitched low and careful, "are you hurt?" Clara opened her mouth to answer, but what came out was a sob. She pressed her hand to her lips, horrified by her own loss of control, but the tears came anyway, hot and unstoppable. The cowboy did not move, did not try to come closer or offer empty reassurances. He simply waited, patient as the stones around them, until her crying had exhausted itself into hitching breaths. "My name is Vincent Wright," he said, when she had finally gone silent. "I've been tracking a stray calf since yesterday, but I reckon that can wait. You look like you have had a harder night than I have." "They killed him," Clara whispered. "They killed Thomas, and they will kill me too if they find me." Vincent's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flash of anger quickly controlled. "Who did?" "Carson's gang. They came to our room at the boarding house. They said Thomas owed them money, but he did not. He would never. They shot him, and I ran." The words tumbled out in a rush now, tripping over each other. "I do not even know where I am. I just ran." "You are about 6 miles northeast of Gold Hill," Vincent said. His voice remained calm and steady, an anchor in the chaos of her fear. "And you are safe right now. I give you my word on that." Clara wanted desperately to believe him, but trust felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. When a jackrabbit burst from the brush behind her, she spun with a cry of terror, her whole body going rigid. Vincent still did not move toward her, but she saw his hands spread slightly at his sides, showing her they were empty. "Just a rabbit," he said gently. "Nothing to harm you here." She knew that, knew it logically, but her heart continued to race as if the devil himself had appeared. Every sound seemed magnified, threatening. The rustle of leaves in the breeze became footsteps. The distant cry of a hawk became a shout. She was shaking again, her arms wrapped around herself, as if she could physically hold her fear contained. Vincent studied her for a long moment, then moved in slow motion to his saddlebags. Clara tensed, ready to run despite her exhaustion, but he simply pulled out a canteen and a cloth-wrapped bundle. These he set on a flat rock midway between them before retreating back to his horse. "Food and water," he said. "You should eat something if you can manage it." The smell of whatever was in that bundle made Clara's stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. She had not eaten since yesterday's midday meal, and her body was loudly reminding her of that fact. Still, she could not make herself move toward it. The open ground between her position and that rock seemed impossibly vast and exposed. Vincent appeared to understand her hesitation. He settled himself on another rock near his horse, pulling his hat down over his eyes as if preparing for a nap. "I will be right here," he said. "Take your time." It took Clara nearly 10 minutes to work up the courage to dart forward and snatch the food and water. She retreated immediately to her tree, her eyes never leaving Vincent's relaxed form. He did not move, did not even lift his hat to watch her. That small act of trust, that deliberate granting of privacy, did something to ease the tight band around her chest. She unwrapped the bundle with trembling fingers and found cornbread and dried beef, simple trail food that tasted like a feast to her starving body. As she ate, she studied Vincent more carefully. He wore a gun on his hip, but it sat undisturbed in its holster. His horse was well kept but not fancy, a working animal rather than a showpiece. Everything about him spoke of a man who earned his living through honest labor rather than violence. When she had finished eating, she cleared her throat softly, and he tilted his hat back to look at her. "Thank you," she managed. "You are welcome." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. I work at the Double Bar Ranch about 12 miles south of here. The owners, James and Martha Keller, are good people. They would give you a safe place to stay while you figure out what comes next. I cannot go back to Gold Hill, Clara said quickly. Carson will be looking for me. No, you should not go back there alone, Vincent agreed. But eventually, the law will need to hear what happened. Jacob Carson has been terrorizing this territory for 2 years now. Every witness who speaks against him is another nail in the coffin the marshal is trying to build. The thought of facing Carson in a courtroom made Clara feel sick, but she pushed the fear aside for the moment. Survival first, justice later. Will you take me to this ranch? She asked. To the Kellers. If you are willing, Vincent said. He stood up slowly, telegraphing every movement, and walked to his horse. You can ride and I will walk. It is not far. Clara forced herself to her feet, swaying slightly as exhaustion and the previous night's terror caught up with her. Vincent brought his horse closer but stopped several yards away, offering her the reins with an outstretched arm. She took them with shaking hands, and the paint mare turned her large head to look at Clara with soft, curious eyes. The horse's calm presence helped steady her nerves. Animals could sense danger, could sense cruelty. This mare showed no signs of fear around her master. Mounting was an awkward affair in her dress and in her state of exhaustion, but Vincent kept his distance and his eyes averted until she was settled in the saddle. Then he took up a position at the horse's head and began walking south, leading the mare with a steady, unhurried pace. They traveled in silence for the first mile, and Clara found herself gradually relaxing into the swaying rhythm of the horse's gait. The sun was warm on her back, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something other than raw terror. You said your name was Vincent Wright, she said finally. Yes, miss. Most folks call me Vince. I am Clara Brennan. My husband was Thomas Brennan. We came to Gold Hill from Sacramento this spring. I am sorry for your loss, Vince said quietly. No one should have to witness what you witnessed. The simple sincerity in his voice brought fresh tears to Clara's eyes, but she blinked them away. She had done enough crying. What will happen to his body? She asked. I just left him there. Someone will have found him by now, Vince assured her. The boarding house keeper, most likely, or the marshal. He will be cared for properly. The thought brought some small comfort. Clara let the silence stretch again, watching the back of Vince's head as he walked. He moved with remarkable quiet for a man of his size, his boots barely seeming to disturb the rocky ground. When her horse suddenly shied at a snake sunning itself on a boulder, Vince had the mare calmed with a low word and a gentle hand before Clara could even react. His presence radiated a calm steadiness that she found herself desperately wanting to trust. They stopped twice to rest in whatever shade they could find, and each time Vince positioned himself at a careful distance, never crowding her, never making any sudden movements. He spoke only when Clara initiated conversation, and even then his answers were brief and thoughtful. She learned that he was 26 years old, had been working ranches since he was 14, and had come to Nevada from Wyoming the previous year. He had a younger sister living in Denver with her husband and a baby son Vince had never met. His parents had died of fever when he was 19. Do you like the work? Clara asked during their second rest stop. Ranching, I mean. Vince considered the question seriously. I do. It is honest work and I am good with horses. I like being outdoors, like the freedom of it. Some men want to own land, build empires. I am content to work for my wages and save what I can. Do you ever get lonely? The question slipped out before Clara could stop it, too personal and too revealing of her own state of mind, but Vince did not seem offended. Sometimes, he admitted. But then, I figure most people are lonely in one way or another, whether they are alone or not." He glanced at her briefly, then away. "I reckon you understand that." Clara did. Her marriage to Thomas had been arranged by her father to settle a business debt, and while Thomas had been kind enough, there had been no great passion between them, no deep understanding. She had been fond of him, had grieved his death genuinely, but she could not claim they had ever truly known each other's hearts. "Yes," she said softly, "I do." The sun was sliding toward the western horizon when they finally reached the Double Bar Ranch. It was a sprawling operation with a large main house, a bunkhouse, several barns, and an extensive network of corrals. As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the slanting light. She was in her 50s, Clara guessed, with iron-gray hair and a sturdy build. "Vince," she called. "That you?" "Yes, madam, Mrs. Keller. I brought a guest who needs some help." Martha Keller's expression shifted from curiosity to concern as she took in Clara's disheveled appearance and exhausted face. She hurried forward, not with the cautious care Vince had shown, but with the brisk efficiency of a woman accustomed to dealing with crises. "Good Lord, child, you look half dead. Come inside right now. Vince, stable your horse and then find James. Tell him we will need to talk." Clara slid from the saddle, her legs nearly buckling when they hit the ground. Martha caught her arm with a firm grip. "I have got you," she said. "Let us get you fed and cleaned up, and then you can tell me what happened." Being shepherded into the warm, lamp-lit kitchen felt surreal after the nightmare of the previous hours. Martha sat Clara down at a large wooden table and immediately began assembling food: cold chicken, bread, butter, and a bowl of stew heated from a pot on the stove. While Clara ate, Martha bustled around preparing a bath in a small room off the kitchen, talking in a steady stream that required no responses and seemed designed purely to fill the silence with comforting normalcy. "You are safe here," Martha said as she tested the water temperature. "Whatever trouble you are running from, it stops at our property line. James and I have 7 ranch hands, all good men, and we do not tolerate violence or meanness of any kind. Now, let us get you into this bath before you collapse entirely." The hot water was pure bliss against Clara's aching muscles. Martha left her alone to soak, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Clara felt the rigid tension in her body begin to ease. She scrubbed away the dust and sweat and fear, washed her hair with the lavender-scented soap Martha had provided, and emerged feeling almost human again. Martha had laid out clean clothes, a simple cotton dress that was a bit too large but infinitely better than Clara's torn and stained garments. When Clara returned to the kitchen, she found Vince there with Martha and a gray-bearded man who could only be James Keller. All three stood when she entered, and James stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Miss Brennan, is it? Martha tells me you have been through something terrible. Please, sit down and tell us what we can do to help." Clara took a seat and, with her hands wrapped around a mug of hot coffee, told them the whole story. Speaking it aloud made it real in a way it had not been before, and her voice broke several times, but she pushed through to the end. When she finished, James and Martha exchanged a long look, and Vince's jaw was tight with barely suppressed anger. "Jacob Carson," James said heavily. "That devil has been preying on this territory for too long. Did anyone else see what happened?" "I do not know," Clara admitted. "It all happened so fast. There were other people in the boarding house, but I do not know if they saw anything." "We will send word to Marshal Dawson in Virginia City," James decided. "He is a good man, honest and thorough. He has been trying to build a case against Carson for months. Your testimony could be the key he needs." But Carson will try to silence me, Clara said, fear tightening her throat again. He has already killed Thomas. He would not hesitate to kill me too. He will not get the chance, James said firmly. You will stay here as our guest for as long as you need. We have strong locks on the doors, and my men take turns on watch every night. You will be protected. Martha reached across the table to pat Clara's hand. We lost our daughter 5 years ago to cholera, she said quietly. So you will forgive me if I seem a bit overprotective. Having a young woman in the house again feels like a blessing, and I will see you safe come hell or high water. The kindness in her voice broke through the last of Clara's composure, and she wept openly, this time not from fear but from overwhelming gratitude and grief. Martha came around the table to hold her, rocking her gently while James and Vince diplomatically stepped outside to give them privacy. When Clara's tears finally subsided, she felt wrung out but somehow lighter, as if the crying had drained away some of the poison. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "Hush now," Martha said. "You are safe. That is all that matters right now." Clara was installed in a small bedroom on the second floor of the house, a cozy space with a quilt-covered bed and lace curtains at the window. She fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted beyond measure, and did not wake until mid-morning the next day. When she finally made her way downstairs, she found Martha in the kitchen kneading bread dough, and through the window she could see Vince working with a young horse in one of the corrals. "Good morning," Martha said cheerfully. "There is coffee on the stove and biscuits in the tin. Help yourself to anything you want." Clara poured herself coffee and stood at the window, watching Vince work. He moved around the skittish colt with the same quiet patience he had shown her the previous day, never rushing, never forcing. The colt had clearly been spooked by something, shying away from the slightest movement. But Vince simply stood in the center of the corral and waited, letting the animal come to him in its own time. It took nearly 20 minutes, but eventually the colt approached, stretching its neck to sniff Vince's extended hand. "He is good with damaged things," Martha said, coming to stand beside Clara. "Animals, people, it does not seem to matter. He has a gift for patience that most folks never learn." "He saved my life," Clara said softly. "Yes, I imagine he did, and he will not accept a word of thanks for it either. That boy is modest to a fault." Martha returned to her bread dough, punching it down with practiced efficiency. James sent word to Marshal Dawson at first light. "We should hear back within a few days. In the meantime, you are welcome to help around the house if you feel up to it, or simply rest. Whatever you need." Clara discovered that keeping busy helped quiet the fear that still lurked at the edges of her mind. She helped Martha with cooking and cleaning, mended clothing for the ranch hands, and gradually began to feel useful again rather than simply like a victim. But the fear never entirely left her. Every unexpected sound made her jump: a door slamming, a horse whinnying, the ranch hands laughing loudly in the yard. She would freeze mid-task, her heart hammering, unable to calm herself until she had confirmed there was no threat. Vince seemed to notice. He began making a point of moving more quietly around the ranch when she was nearby, announcing his presence with a soft word before entering a room, knocking gently instead of barging through doors. The other ranch hands followed his example without comment, and Clara suspected Vince had spoken to them privately. The consideration made her eyes sting with grateful tears. On the third evening of her stay, Clara was helping Martha shell peas on the front porch when Vince rode in from the range. He tended to his horse first, as always, then approached the porch with his hat in his hands. "Evening, Mrs. Keller, Miss Brennan." "Evening, Vince," Martha said. "Have you eaten?" "Yes, madam, we cooked out on the range, but I would not say no to some of your cornbread if there is any left." There is always cornbread for you, dear boy. Clara, would you mind fetching it? It is in the tin on the counter." Clara rose and went inside, grateful for the task. When she returned with the cornbread wrapped in a cloth, Vince was sitting on the porch steps, and Martha had tactfully disappeared into the house. Clara hesitated, then sat down on the step above him, leaving a careful distance between them. "Thank you," Vince said as he accepted the food. "And thank you for not running scared every time I come near. I know I must still seem like just another stranger to you." "You do not," Clara said honestly. "You have been nothing but kind. It is not you I am afraid of. It is everything. Every sound, every shadow, I feel like I am losing my mind." Vince was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "When I was 19 and my parents died," he said finally, "I spent months jumping at every little thing. I could not sleep, could not eat properly. I kept expecting more bad news, more tragedy. It felt like the whole world had become dangerous." "What made it stop?" Clara asked. "Time, mostly. And accepting that I could not control everything, could not prevent every possible disaster. I could only do my best to live carefully and trust that most people are decent." He glanced up at her, his blue eyes steady and kind. "It is different for you, though. What happened to you was not an accident or an illness. It was violence, and violence leaves different scars. But I promise you, Clara, those scars will heal. Maybe not all the way, but enough that you can live again." The use of her first name, casual and warm, sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She looked away, focusing on the darkening horizon. "I hope you are right." "I usually am," Vince said lightly, and Clara found herself smiling despite everything. They fell into an easy routine over the following days. Vince would work the ranch during the day, and in the evenings he would often find Clara on the porch or in the garden and sit with her for a while, talking about nothing important: the weather, the horses, stories from his travels. He never touched her, never pushed for more than she was willing to give, but his presence became a source of comfort rather than stress. Gradually, Clara found herself relaxing around him, actually looking forward to their conversations. Marshall Dawson arrived on a Tuesday morning, a stern-faced man in his 50s with a badge pinned to his vest and a reputation for honesty. He questioned Clara gently but thoroughly, taking careful notes about everything she had seen and heard. When she described Thomas's murder in detail, her voice shook but did not break. She was getting stronger, she realized. The raw, paralyzing fear was giving way to something more manageable. "This is valuable testimony," Dawson said when she finished. "Combined with the evidence we have been gathering, this should be enough to bring charges against Carson and his gang. But I will not lie to you, Miss Brennan. Carson has friends in low places, and he will fight this. You will need to be prepared to testify in court, which means staying somewhere safe until the trial." "She can stay here as long as necessary," James said firmly. "We will see she comes to no harm." Dawson nodded, looking relieved. "I will post a deputy nearby just as an extra precaution. Carson is unpredictable when cornered, and I would rather be overly cautious than underprepared." The deputy, a young man named Samuel Porter, arrived the next day and took up residence in the bunkhouse. His presence should have made Clara feel safer, but instead it served as a constant reminder that she was in danger. She found herself sliding backward into hypervigilance, jumping at every sound again, unable to sleep properly. Dark circles appeared under her eyes, and Martha fretted over her like a mother hen. It was Vince who finally broke through her spiral of fear. He found her one evening sitting in the barn, hugging her knees to her chest and shaking like a leaf because a barn cat had knocked over a bucket, and the crash had sent her into a panic. He did not try to touch her or force her to calm down. Instead, He sat down about 10 feet away and started talking in that low, steady voice of his. "When I was working a ranch up in Wyoming," he said, "we had this old mare named Daisy who had been abused by her previous owner. She was terrified of everything, especially men. Would not let anyone near her. The boss wanted to sell her, said she was not worth the trouble, but I asked for a chance to work with her." Clara's breathing was starting to slow, her attention caught by the story. "I spent weeks just sitting in her stall," Vince continued. "Not trying to touch her, not even really looking at her. Just being there, quiet and calm, letting her get used to my presence. Some days she would stand as far away as possible, practically climbing the walls. Other days she would creep a little closer. I never pushed, never rushed her." "What happened?" Clara whispered. "After about a month she walked right up to me and put her nose in my hand. It was the smallest thing, but it felt like a miracle. Within 3 months she was the gentlest mare on the ranch. She just needed time and patience to learn that not everyone was going to hurt her." Clara understood what he was really saying. She was not broken. She just needed time and patience. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You do not need to thank me," Vince said. "I am just telling you the truth. You are stronger than you think, Clara Brennan, and you are not alone in this." Something shifted between them in that moment, some invisible wall crumbling away. Clara found herself looking at Vince not just as her rescuer or her friend, but as a man, a good, kind, patient man who made her heart beat faster when he smiled. The realization terrified her almost as much as Carson's gang had. She was a widow, barely 2 weeks bereaved. She had no business thinking about any man in romantic terms. But the heart, she was learning, did not follow logical timelines. Over the next few weeks, Clara's feelings for Vince grew despite her best efforts to contain them. She noticed everything about him: the way he pushed his hair back when he was thinking, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the gentleness of his hands with animals and people alike. She caught herself watching him work, admiring the efficient grace of his movements, and had to force her attention back to her own tasks before Martha noticed. If Vince felt anything beyond friendship for her, he gave no sign. He remained respectful and careful, never crossing the invisible boundaries Clara had established. Part of her appreciated his restraint. Another part of her, a part she barely wanted to acknowledge, wished desperately that he would cross those boundaries, would give her some sign that his feelings matched her own. Winter settled over the Nevada high desert, bringing cold nights and occasional snow. Clara had been at the Double Bar Ranch for almost 2 months when word finally came that Carson had been arrested. Marshal Dawson brought the news himself, looking satisfied but cautious. "We rounded up the whole gang," he told Clara, James, and Martha over coffee in the warm kitchen. "Found them holed up in an abandoned mining camp near Dayton. They will be tried in Virginia City starting in January. Miss Brennan, your testimony will be crucial." Clara's hands tightened around her coffee mug. "I will be there," she said firmly. "Thomas deserves justice." The trial was set for mid-January. As the date approached, Clara found her anxiety increasing despite her determination to see it through. The thought of facing Carson again, of looking into the eyes of the man who had murdered her husband, made her feel physically ill. But she held fast to her resolve, drawing strength from the support of the Kellers and, especially, from Vince. 2 days before they were scheduled to leave for Virginia City, Vince found Clara in the kitchen after dinner. Martha had already retired for the evening, and James was in his study working on the ranch accounts. Clara was washing dishes, her hands moving mechanically through the familiar task, when Vince cleared his throat softly from the doorway. "May I come in?" he asked. "Of course," Clara said, drying her hands on her apron. Vince entered, holding his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I wanted to talk to you before the trial," he said. "There is something I need to say, and I figure if I do not say it now, I might lose my courage." Clara's heart began to pound. "All right." "I know the timing is terrible," Vince said in a rush. "I know you are still grieving your husband and dealing with everything that happened. But Clara, I have to tell you that I have developed feelings for you. Strong feelings. You are the bravest, strongest woman I have ever met, and you are also kind and funny and beautiful, and I find myself thinking about you every moment of every day." Clara stared at him, her heart in her throat. "I am not asking you for anything," Vince continued quickly. "I know you need time, and I am more than willing to give you all the time you need. I just wanted you to know before the trial that you matter to me, that you are not alone, that whatever happens, I will be here for you if you want me." The words Clara had been holding back for weeks tumbled out before she could stop them. "I want you," she said. "I have wanted you for longer than I should admit. I feel guilty about it because Thomas has been dead for such a short time, but I cannot seem to help it. You make me feel safe and seen and valued in a way I never have before." Vince's expression transformed, hope and joy lighting his eyes. "You do not need to feel guilty," he said gently. "The heart feels what it feels. That does not diminish what you felt for Thomas or disrespect his memory." "I am scared," Clara admitted. "I am scared of so many things. Scared of the trial, scared of these feelings, scared of being hurt again." "I know," Vince said, "and I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen. But I can promise you that I will never deliberately hurt you, and I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, if you will let me." Clara crossed the space between them in 3 quick steps and threw her arms around him. Vince caught her, wrapping her in an embrace that felt like coming home. For a long moment they simply stood there, holding each other, and Clara felt something inside her finally settle. This was right. This was real. Whatever came next, they would face it together. When Vince finally pulled back enough to look at her face, his eyes were soft with emotion. "May I kiss you?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Clara breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and warm and perfect. The kiss was brief, chaste, but it sent warmth flooding through Clara's entire body. When they separated, both were smiling, and the fear that had haunted Clara for months felt manageable for the first time. She was not alone. She had Vince, and she had the Kellers, and she had her own strength that she was only beginning to recognize. The trip to Virginia City was tense but uneventful. Vince accompanied Clara, James, and Marshall Dawson, riding close to the wagon that carried Clara and serving as both protector and moral support. They arrived 2 days before the trial was set to begin, and the marshal installed Clara in a secure room at a hotel with a guard posted at her door. She hated the restrictions, hated feeling like a prisoner, but she understood they were necessary. The trial itself was a blur of testimony and legal arguments. Clara took the stand on the second day, and with Vince watching from the gallery and Dawson's steady presence nearby, she told her story once again. Carson sat at the defense table, his eyes cold and hard, but Clara refused to look away. She described everything she had witnessed in clear, unwavering detail, and when the defense attorney tried to shake her testimony, she held firm. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. Carson was sentenced to hang, along with the gang member who had actually pulled the trigger. The others received lengthy prison sentences. When the verdict was read, Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying since that terrible night in Gold Hill. Justice had been served. Thomas could rest in peace. Outside the courthouse, Vince was waiting for her. He pulled her into his arms and she let herself cry, this time from relief and closure rather than fear. "It is over," she said against his chest. "It is finally over." "Yes," Vince said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And now you can start living again." They returned to the Double Bar Ranch, where Martha had prepared a celebratory dinner. That evening, sitting on the porch with Vince while the winter stars wheeled overhead, Clara felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. "What will you do now?" Vince asked, his hand warm around hers. "I do not know," Clara admitted. "I cannot go back to Gold Hill. Too many bad memories. But I do not know where else to go." "You could stay here," Vince said carefully. "Martha and James have already said you are welcome for as long as you want, and there is me if you want me." Clara turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. This strong, quiet man who had saved her life was offering her his heart, and suddenly she knew exactly what she wanted. "I want you," she said firmly. "I want to stay here, and I want to see where this goes between us. I want to stop running and start building something real." Vince's smile was radiant. "That sounds perfect to me." They took things slowly over the following months, courting properly under Martha's watchful but approving eye. Vince taught Clara to ride properly, and they spent hours exploring the ranch lands together, talking and laughing and gradually letting down all their walls. He told her about his childhood, his dreams, his fears. She told him about her life before Thomas, her arranged marriage, her desire for a partnership built on genuine love and respect. By the time spring arrived, painting the desert with wildflowers, Clara knew without a doubt that she wanted to spend her life with Vince. When he proposed one evening in the garden, going down on one knee with a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother, Clara said yes without hesitation. They were married in May of 1878, on a warm Saturday afternoon with Martha and James and all the ranch hands in attendance. Marshall Dawson even made the trip from Virginia City to see them wed. Clara wore a dress Martha had helped her sew, and Vince wore his best suit with his hair freshly trimmed. When the traveling preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vince kissed Clara with such tenderness and joy that several of the ranch hands had to wipe their eyes. The Kellers had offered to build them a small house on the ranch property, and Vince had accepted gratefully. It was nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Clara threw herself into making it a home, sewing curtains, planting a vegetable garden, filling the space with warmth and love. Vince proved to be an attentive and considerate husband, always mindful of her feelings, always ready to listen and support. The physical intimacy of their marriage was a revelation to Clara, who had never experienced such gentleness and passion combined. With Vince, she felt cherished and desired and safe all at once. Their first child, a son they named William, was born in February of 1879. Vince was present for the birth, holding Clara's hand through the long hours of labor, and when he finally held his son for the first time, tears streamed down his face. "Thank you," he whispered to Clara, kissing her sweat-dampened forehead. "Thank you for this gift." William was a healthy, happy baby who grew into a curious toddler. Clara discovered that motherhood suited her, though the sleepless nights and constant demands were exhausting. Vince was an involved father, coming in from the ranch to help with feedings and diaper changes, singing off key lullabies that made William gurgle with laughter. Watching Vince with their son filled Clara with a love so profound, it sometimes took her breath away. In 1881, their daughter Rose was born, a tiny, dark-haired beauty who had her father's blue eyes. William, now 2, was fascinated by his new sister and spent hours watching her sleep, patting her tiny hands with remarkable gentleness for such a young child. The house felt full to bursting with love and noise, and the beautiful chaos of family life. James Keller passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1883, leaving the ranch to Martha with the provision that Vince should manage it if he was willing. Vince accepted the responsibility, and Clara helped Martha run the household and the business side of the operation. It was hard work, but Clara found she had a head for numbers and negotiations, skills she had never had the chance to develop during her brief marriage to Thomas. The ranch prospered under Vince's management. He proved to be fair and innovative, improving breeding lines and expanding their operations carefully. The ranch hands respected him, and neighboring ranchers sought his advice. Clara was immensely proud of him, though he remained as modest as ever, deflecting credit to his employees and Martha's support. Their third child, a daughter they named Catherine, was born in 1884. She was a fiery, strong-willed child who kept them all on their toes. William, now 5 and Rose 3, adored their baby sister and fought over who got to help care for her. The house rang with laughter and squabbles and the endless energy of childhood. Martha passed away in 1887, just 3 weeks after her 70th birthday. She went peacefully, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch she had loved so much. Clara and Vince mourned her deeply, but they found comfort in knowing she had been happy in her final years, surrounded by the family she had chosen. The ranch officially passed to Vince, and he took ownership with a solemn promise to honor the Kellers' legacy. The years rolled on, full of the ordinary joys and challenges of life. There were hard winters and drought years, sick children and injured horses, disagreements and reconciliations. But through it all, Clara and Vince remained each other's anchor. They still took evening walks together when they could, still sat on the porch after the children were asleep and talked about everything and nothing. In 1889, when William was 10, Rose 8, and Catherine 5, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, and at 33 she felt every ache and pain. But when their fourth child, a son they named Thomas after Clara's first husband, was born healthy and strong, all the discomfort was forgotten. Vince had suggested the name, wanting to honor the man whose death had brought them together, and Clara had agreed with tears in her eyes. By 1892, the ranch was thriving, and their children were growing into capable, kind young people. William showed an aptitude for horse training that made Vince grin with pride. Rose had Clara's sharp mind for business. Catherine was adventurous and fearless, already declaring she would be a rancher herself one day. And young Thomas, now 3, toddled around the ranch charming everyone he met with his sunny disposition. One evening in late summer, Clara and Vince sat on their porch watching the sun set over the Nevada desert. The children were occupied with various activities, William working with a colt in the corral, Rose reading to Catherine under a tree, Thomas napping inside. The air was warm and still, filled with the sweet scent of the flowers Clara had planted along the porch rail. "You ever think about that night?" Vince asked quietly. "The night I found you in the ravine." Clara took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But not with fear anymore. I think about how lost I was, how broken I felt, and how you helped me find my way back to myself." "You did most of that on your own," Vince said. "I just walked beside you." "You did more than that," Clara insisted. "You showed me that gentleness and strength can coexist. You taught me that love does not have to be loud or dramatic to be real. You gave me a family and a home and a life I never dreamed I could have." Vince raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You gave me all of those things too," he said. "Before you, I was just going through the motions. After you, I finally understood what it meant to truly live." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Inside the house, Thomas woke from his nap and called for his mother, and Clara reluctantly stood to tend to him. But before she went inside, she turned back to Vince. "I love you," she said, "more than I can ever adequately express." "I love you too," Vince replied, his blue eyes warm with the emotion he had never learned to hide from her. "Always have, always will." Clara went inside with a smile on her face and warmth in her heart. The terror and trauma of that night in Gold Hill felt like it had happened to someone else in another lifetime. She had been hunted and frightened, jumping at every sound like a deer fleeing wolves. But Vince had moved quietly through her fear, had earned her calm through patience and kindness, and together they had built something beautiful out of tragedy. The years continued to unfold with their mix of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. William grew into a tall, capable young man who took over more and more of the ranch's horse training operation. At 19, he married a sweet-natured girl from Virginia City named Alice, and they gave Clara and Vince their first grandchild, a boy named James after the man who had given them all so much. Rose, at 17, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to study law. She had followed the suffrage movement with passionate interest and dreamed of fighting for women's rights. Vince and Clara supported her ambitions fully, scraping together the money to send her to a women's college in San Francisco. She wrote them letters full of excitement about her studies and her new friends, and Clara could not have been prouder. Catherine, true to her word, showed no interest in traditional women's work. At 15, she could rope and ride as well as any ranch hand, and she spent every spare moment working alongside her father and brother. Vince sometimes worried about her lack of interest in marriage prospects, but Clara reassured him that Catherine would find her own path in her own time. Young Thomas, now 12, was showing signs of inheriting his father's quiet wisdom and his mother's quick mind. He loved books and learning, but also enjoyed the physical work of ranch life. Clara often found him reading in unlikely places, perched in the hayloft, or sitting on a corral fence while horses milled around him. In 1899, Clara turned 43, and Vince surprised her with a trip to San Francisco to visit Rose, who was now a practicing attorney focusing on property rights for women. Leaving the ranch and the younger children in William and Alice's capable hands, Clara and Vince took the train west, marveling at how much the world had changed in the 21 years since they had met. Rose met them at the station, dressed in a smart suit and looking every inch the professional woman. Over dinner at a fashionable restaurant, she told them about her cases and her work with various reform organizations. Clara listened with pride and a touch of wistfulness, thinking about the girl she had been at Rose's age, trapped in a loveless marriage, with no dreams beyond survival. How different the world was for her daughter, and how grateful she was for that difference. On their last night in the city, Vince and Clara walked along the waterfront, watching ships come and go in the harbor. "We have done well," Vince said, pulling Clara close against the cool ocean breeze. "Raised good children, built a good life. I could not ask for more." "Neither could I," Clara agreed, but there was a shadow in her voice and Vince caught it immediately. "What is it?" he asked gently. "I am just thinking about how quickly time passes," Clara said. "The children are nearly grown. William has his own family. Rose has her career. Soon they will all be gone, living their own lives. And we will still have each other," Vince reminded her, "just like we have from the beginning." Clara smiled and leaned into his embrace. He was right, of course. Their children were their legacy and their joy, but the foundation of their family had always been the partnership between her and Vince. That would endure no matter what changes came. They returned to Nevada to find that Catherine, at 19, had fallen in love with a young ranch hand named Samuel Winters. Catherine had been adamant that she would never marry, but Sam had won her over with his respect for her abilities and his willingness to see her as an equal partner. The wedding that fall was a joyous affair, with Rose traveling from San Francisco and friends coming from ranches all over the territory. Thomas, now 15, had begun courting the schoolteacher's daughter, a bright girl named Emma who loved books as much as he did. Watching her youngest son navigate young love with Vince's quiet steadiness and her own determination brought Clara full circle. This was the legacy they had built: children who knew how to love with strength and gentleness, who had been raised to value kindness and integrity above all else. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. Clara and Vince, now in their 40s, stood on their porch on New Year's Eve of 1900, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and watched fireworks light up the Nevada sky. William and Alice had 3 children now. Catherine and Sam were expecting their first. Rose, still unmarried and claiming to be perfectly happy that way, stood with her arm linked through Thomas's, the 2 youngest siblings close as ever. "What do you think the new century will bring?" Rose asked her parents. Vince considered the question seriously. "Change," he said finally. "Some good, some difficult. But if we face it together as a family, I believe we can handle whatever comes." "Spoken like the wise man you are," Clara teased, and the family laughed. As the fireworks faded and the children began to drift off to their respective homes and beds, Clara and Vince remained on the porch, Vince's arm around Clara's shoulders. 22 years, Clara mused. "Has it really been that long? Feels like yesterday sometimes," Vince said. "Other times feels like you have always been part of my life." "I am grateful for every day," Clara said seriously, "even the hard ones, especially the hard ones because they taught me how strong we are together." "We are a good team," Vince agreed. He paused, then added quietly, "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if that night had gone differently? If you had not run, or if I had not been out looking for that calf?" Clara did not have to think long about her answer. "I would not be alive," she said simply. "One way or another, Carson would have killed me. You saved my life, Vince, and then you gave me a reason to truly live it. I will never regret a single moment of our time together." They stood together in the quiet darkness, 2 people who had found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful out of tragedy. The desert stretched around them, vast and eternal, and overhead the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. And in their small corner of Nevada, in the home they had built with their own hands and filled with love, Clara and Vince stood united, ready to face whatever the new century would bring. Years continued to pass in their steady rhythm. Thomas married his Emma in 1903, and they settled in a small house on the ranch property, with Thomas taking on more of the business management while Vince focused on training. Catherine and Sam had 3 daughters who were as wild and fearless as their mother, much to Clara's amusement and occasional alarm. William and Alice's children grew into capable young people who loved the ranch as much as their grandfather did. And Rose, after years of insisting she was married to her work, surprised everyone by falling in love with a fellow attorney in 1905 and marrying him in a simple ceremony in San Francisco. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding carefully under the combined management of Vince and Thomas. They weathered economic downturns and drought years, celebrated good seasons and new foals, and maintained the reputation for honest dealing and quality stock that James Keller had established decades before. The Double Bar brand became synonymous with integrity throughout Nevada and beyond. In 1910, when Clara turned 54 and Vince was 58, they decided to step back from daily ranch operations and turn full control over to Thomas and William. Catherine and Sam had purchased a neighboring ranch and were doing well with their own operation. Rose had made partner in her law firm and was arguing cases before the state Supreme Court. Their grandchildren numbered 14 and growing, a whole new generation to carry forward the values Vince and Clara had worked so hard to instill. On a warm evening in May, exactly 32 years after their wedding day, Clara and Vince took their customary walk around the ranch. Their steps were slower now, their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work and life well lived, but their hands were still linked, their connection as strong as ever. "You remember the first time we walked together?" Clara asked, thinking back to that terrifying journey from the ravine to the ranch. "You leading your horse with me riding, being so careful not to frighten me. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met," Vince said. "Terrified but still fighting, still surviving. I knew right then that you were special." "I thought you were the kindest man in the world," Clara admitted, "and I was right. You still are." They reached their favorite spot, a small rise that overlooked the ranch buildings and the mountains beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and in the corrals below they could see Thomas working with a young horse while his and Emma's children watched. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimney of William and Alice's house, and somewhere on the evening breeze came the sound of Catherine's daughters laughing. "We built something good," Vince said softly. "Something that will last long after we are gone." "We built it together," Clara corrected. "Every step of the way." They stood in silence for a while, watching the light fade and the stars emerge. Clara thought about the terrified young woman she had been, running blindly into the desert with death at her heels. She thought about the long journey from that moment to this one, every trial and triumph, every joy and sorrow. And she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing, because every moment, even the darkest ones, had led her here to this man, this family, this life. "I love you," she said, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. "I love you too," Vince replied, pulling her close. "Always have, always will." As the last light faded from the sky and the ranch settled into evening quiet, Clara and Vince turned back toward their home, walking side by side as they had for more than 3 decades. Behind them, the land they had worked and loved stretched vast and beautiful. Before them, their home glowed with lamplight and the promise of a warm fire and comfortable chairs, and perhaps a cup of coffee before bed. And around them, though they could not see it directly, was the legacy of love and family. They had built a legacy that would endure for generations to come, a testament to the power of patience, kindness, and 2 people who found each other in the wilderness and chose to build their lives together.